Boom, recording. This is the way to go. Yeah, nice. We're live. That was such a fail.
Guys, we all need to thank Johnny. Thank Johnny for dealing with my hotel Wi-Fi during this awful internet connection for our episode 3 of Many Such Cases. What do we talk about today?
Channels, moderation, hotel Wi-Fi, URL, IRL. What else?
Oh, shit. Well, really quick, guys, the Solana connected wallet address thing is actually really cool because there's nowhere else right now where you can see both someone's activity on Ethereum and on Solana. And so actually this is like revolutionary. I didn't realize it. Maybe with some embedded wallets like Near, etc., you can do that in the future, but like right now this is wild. And shout out to Tony Daddy-O, just kidding, Teo Dad, who helped me understand this at the Austin meetup. But anyways, it's actually really cool, and I feel like a midwit for not knowing that last episode. Anyways, we talked about podcasts, we talked about channels, we really talked about channels, we talked about the growth contraction at the end and what we think is the future of Farcaster. And we talked about Johnny's beautiful life, and that made me the happiest.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm shithead Steve, shithead Ted today.
Hey,
We're back.
take two.
Yeah, take two. Feelings check-in. Why don't we go first with you?
Okay.
How are you feeling? You came off a major week with Hypersub and still going.
Yep, still going. Good week. A lot of excitement around Hypersub. People using it. It's great. It's exciting. Moderation is this interesting problem that reared its nasty head again this week. So I have some stories to share there. And in-frame transactions, super excited about that. Subscribe with Warps, really excited about that. A little bit of FOMO from ETH Denver, although not that much FOMO because I don't know. I feel like those things are always, I don't want to talk shit on ETH Denver, but yeah.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. It's like everyone who's here is like super, super hype about it, and it seems very fun, but like how much are you actually missing out?
Yeah, exactly.
Is the question.
And it's funny, it's like you're always feeling FOMO in one direction, like because you go to the event and then you're like, oh, there's shit happening on Farcaster and like I'm missing out there. But if you're hanging out on Farcaster, it means you're not hanging out IRL, so you're missing out there. So I don't know. Yeah, that's it. I mean, what about you?
What about me? Let's see. We recorded our last episode before the paid cancellation of Waj that everyone is alleging, and the beef with Ace. I wouldn't call it beef, and it went straight from being called a Karen to a Farcaster meetup with other Farcaster people. And there's like 5% of me was like, oh, are these people gonna like, do they not like me? Are they gonna be mad at me? I think I stand for principles, and I am very public about them. And that was a case in which not everyone agreed, and that happens. And then of course, as soon as like you meet everyone in real life, they were like, oh my God, we love you. Like we have so much respect for you. It was a good reminder for me that, oh, I have a audience and I've always treated Farcaster as a social network. Like this is just me. It's exactly who I am. I think a lot of people who know me in person and outside know that. And so I've almost less from a builder or founder perspective, almost from a personal, like who I am was like, wow, I need to like reflect on like, okay, like this is what Farcaster is now. This is what it's grown into. Maybe I shouldn't be so trigger fingers with some of the things, although I'll probably still say things that piss people off and stick to my values. And then just being able to hang out with Farcasters in person over the past week and spend a lot of time with them, just like, this is why I'm here. This is why I started here. And it was a really full circle moment because I remember the first Farcaster meetup ever was Alok hosted it. And then Alok was the one in Austin. And so it was just like this really wild, magical, like, oh, wow, I remember we were all here however many years ago. And it was just a small group in LA when everyone was in town. And now, so that's what I've been feeling, stuff like that.
Yeah, I want to maybe just push back a little bit on that because like I actually had a similar experience this past week as well, where I kind of came under a little bit of fire. And I will say that it's a huge part of what makes Farcaster special is people being honest and people being real. And I think that we all felt freedom to do that when it was really small, and it felt like a safe place where you weren't going to get dunked on or piled on. And so I think that there's this culture that's emerged of just truth seeking and honesty and good faith debate. And I think it's very healthy. And I think that the only way that you get there is by just being honest and true to who you are. And so I think you should keep doing that, actually. Yeah,
I will.
yeah, I know you will. I know
You
you
know
will.
I will.
And but I want you to know, like, I encourage it. I think others encourage it as well. I'll give you an example of what happened this past week is N64 Jerry, who I've always liked, good vibes with, good interactions with. He posted a thing in memes about a guy who set himself on fire, like in protest of the war in Gaza. And I didn't know what it was. I actually wasn't aware of the news event. I just saw two memes, one of some random dude, and it was like RIP. I quickly looked it up. I was like, self-immolation, like not funny, not cool. So I hid it. And then, someone else was like, oh, I'm going to add a meme of a guy setting himself on fire, kind of like in protest of me hiding. And I was like, yo, like, I'm just going to hide this and I don't feel bad about it. And there's this whole interaction that happened. And it's funny because by the end of the interaction, I kind of chuckled to myself because I was like, this is like the most Farcaster thing ever. But what happened is, people said this is not right for the community. And I was like, it's not a community. It's a memes channel. It's for laughter and entertainment. Like, I am like the benevolent dictator of this channel. I'm curating it. Like, I think it's grown because of that. I like what Dan has said around like stated versus revealed preference. Like the stated preference is that it should be open, and the revealed preference is that it like should be good. And those two things aren't always in alignment. And so we went back and forth, kind of dunking on each other and being catty and mean. And then the last one, I was just like, dude, I took it personally that you were dunking on me because I actually put a lot of effort into trying to curate this and make it a place for people to laugh. And, I didn't appreciate that. And he was just like, I respect that you said that. And he was like, I appreciate the work that you do. And I didn't mean to dunk on you. And I was like, well, thank you. And it's like, it ended in this really positive way. And then we like DM'd each other and exchanged numbers. And I was like, dude, we're going to hang out like next time that we're in, I'm in SF. And so it ended up being this like I felt like closer to him. It's like he turned into some random person that I've sort of interacted on the internet with to like someone who I'm like definitely going to hang out with, and we're probably going to bro down. And I feel like, there's this thing with like conflict. I think Brian does this too, where it's like he'll kick up a little shit and like have conflict with someone, and then you overcome the conflict, and then now you're friends because you did this thing together.
Yeah, Brian was actually my first
dust up.
Brian was my first fight on Farcaster. Yeah. Like, I think what other people don't realize too is this isn't the first time that I think I've publicly disagreed with somebody. I did it with Brian, was the first one when he was being, his like little Gen Z shithead to a countless about POAP stuff. Right. And I was like, dude, I remember. Cool it. And so like Brian and I kind of like this is like old. And then like Brian and I are homies now. And so the same thing happened with Chris Corella with like some purpler thing. And then the same thing happened with Jason Goldberg, like Beta Shop, where I was like, hey, just disagree with the way that you're doing this. And we had really cordial back and forth. And now I love and respect all of them. Even with John Palmer, Party Dow guy. Everybody knows. We just hung out with him yesterday at East Denver and aligned. Oh, we both want Farcaster to succeed. Like, let's chat about this and like where was it coming from, etc. I agree with you. And I think there are two sides. Like, people who have that ethos in them will look to find that mutual understanding and be open-minded to it. And I think it's important that we lead by example, but also that's just because who we are. Like, that's in our DNA. I'm not just like stirring the pot to stir the pot. I will say something if I believe in it. And then I'm also very willing to change my mind or admit when I'm wrong. I think it's funny that you say like there are things that we take personally, and I guess this is a segue, is that a lot of times when we talk about Farcaster, we talk about builders in the sense of who's developing or hacking or building an app or a client on Farcaster. And I got really butthurt. Like, I will say this, like Brian said something in the drama last week where he was like, what has Ted done? Like, what has Ted built on Farcaster? And I took it really personally because I've feel like I am very intentional about what I've built as well, in terms of like, oh, who I've met, the community I've built, the apps and relationships with developers, with community, with startups, with VCs in Farcaster. That actually has taken effort. It is its own builder journey in a way, and a founder journey. And I think that gets forgotten a lot. And I think what's beautiful about Farcaster is that anyone can be a builder. And I think Jesse also recently said this about like anyone can build on base. There's so much that you can do because it is a decentralized social network in a way. And however you want to build it, whether you see yourself building the memes channel, like that in and of itself is something that you founded and curated and built and been intentional about. That is, in theory, yours. Like it is yours. You are a benevolent dictator, the same way that I've done that as well. And I applaud you for being like, hey, like I took this personally because I've put a lot of effort into it, the same way that I took it personally when Brian was like, what has Ted done? And the same way that Alex Kwan took it personally when I was like, let's encourage better design of the Pearl Bet. So anyways, I think that's a beautiful thing. And the people who will succeed most at doing this are the people who think with an open mind and are open to criticism and open to feedback, because it only makes you better, especially when you're getting feedback from such a high quality community of builders.
Yep.
So anyways, that was a huge monologue. But
No, I'm here for it. I love it. I agree. I think that's exactly right. I mean, there's like that funny joke. It's like if you ever want to know where you might be wrong, just like share your opinion on the internet, and like people will just tell you where you're wrong. But it's unironically that on Farcaster. And I think that what's unique about it is there's this culture of like low ego truth seeking, which is I share an idea, I share an opinion, a point of view, whatever. And some people will be in agreement and some people won't. But what's unique is that oftentimes what you see happening is the person who shared that initial opinion is like, oh, I might be wrong. I think that's everybody's done that. Keckers has done that. Brian has done that. Like Ace has done that. Woj has done that. I've done it. You've done it. It's like that's the culture I think that we're all creating and preserving by doing that publicly. And I think that's very different from what you see on Twitter. Like Twitter, it's like rage farming. It's like drama farming. It almost becomes this like meta game where the really smart people start saying things that they know is gonna make people angry. It's a funny analogy to make, but it reminds me of like what happened to country music. Like it just becomes this parody of itself. You know what I mean? Like you look at modern country music and it's just like, what is this? It's like this joke. It's like too many layers of parody. It's not real. It's not authentic. And I feel like Farcaster is like this culture anyway today. And I hope that channels are the thing that preserve it and scale it. But it's the opposite of that. It's like people who are actually really genuine and they're earnest in the opinions they share. They're willing to change their minds. They're willing to engage in debate. It's awesome, but it's not free, and not everybody can do it.
Yeah.
Like it does mean that you have to go out on a limb to share an opinion that might be controversial. You have to be willing to do that. You have to have the courage to do it. It also means that you have to have the courage to publicly disagree and say, I think you're wrong. And then it also means that you have to have the courage to change your mind. So there's it's kind of a high bar, you know. I think if you're really serious about like committing to Farcaster as a place to build your audience, build distribution, to build on Farcaster, I think you have to be kind of willing to engage in a way that is not very common. You know, there's not a lot of places where this culture exists. So it's both the good thing and the hard thing, but that's what makes it great.
I have a question for
Yes.
you. Do you think that's just us being very idealistic about the world?
I think yes, it is us being idealistic. I was thinking about this when you were talking, and I was like, for Farcaster to succeed, none of what we're sharing is going to matter. Like there's going to be entire ecosystems and like networks of people that emerge who don't know who we are and don't care who we are. They're creating their own lore, their own culture, their own world. And that's good. But I think what we've built is, it's like that analogy about how you have like people on the frontier, people who like build towns, and then people who scale towns. It's like we're like those, we were like the early, you know, pioneers who went and established the early culture. Ideally, I mean, and what success looks like is that everyone forgets about us and it doesn't matter, and the network grows and is indifferent to all of this. But for now it matters, you know, for now it matters. But I think the goal is for it not to.
Is that subtle Kanye West reference of him being like, "You're a good designer." Have you seen this
No.
video? Okay, I actually like kudos to OX Designer for posting this because he was like, "I know we canceled Kanye West," but Kanye West gives this like short interview in which he says, "Do you know who designed a sidewalk? Do
Oh,
you know who
right.
designed a
That's
road?
right.
Do you know who designed the
I
chair?"
remember.
He's like, "If you are an amazing designer, no one knows you. They just know what you built."
Yeah.
I also just want to give a quick shout out to Dan and Varun, but I feel like Dan has been mostly public facing for a lot of this, is that he really set the tone in terms of just straight up asking for feedback and leaning in when people gave really harsh criticism throughout the past years.
Yep.
And I saw that and was like, okay, this is great. Like, this is where we should be leaning in and asking. And I think he set a really good standard and continues to set a good standard when he gets feedback. He's very thoughtful about reflecting on it and, processing it before he responds. I could probably learn a little bit from taking a little bit more time before I hit the reply button. You already named a lot of people who I think help foster that early culture. And I always talk about this, but if I could build a client, I would just build a OG farcaster client that still has all of the features that we have today, but it brings us back to that smaller community where discussion and the conversations are still as rich as they were then. Only because there's so much content now. This probably goes to moderation and channel passes as well, is that there's so much content now that the conversations can't get as deep because before you would see that content for a longer period of time because there wasn't new content to push it to the bottom. And so people would have way more in-depth conversations or something would remain at the top of everybody's mind space because there wasn't new content to push it away. And now that there's just so much content there, I feel like there's stuff that I see or that I'd want to respond to. And then all of a sudden, 2 hours later, I'll check again because I'm busy and I can't even remember what it was and it's hard to find. So that's something else that I think is interesting because there was no need for moderation back then. I think this goes into like channel passes. This last week we were talking about what is the barrier to entry. Before there was absolutely no barrier to entry. And so I'm curious what you've seen with channel passes in the memes channel because I know other people in group chats have been saying, oh, now they're thinking way more about whether or not to cast because they have to purchase a $1 pass.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was wrong in the last episode where I was like, oh, I think they enabled it. They definitely didn't enable it then, but they did this past week. And one thing they did that when they enabled it is they removed hide quietly. And I was like, that's a big problem because what happens is you pay 100 warps, which is $1. There's 105,000 followers to the meme channel. So pretty good deal. $1 for 105,000 for distribution of 105,000. Now you could say, well, QDAO or, Mao is whatever, some percentage of that, but still pretty good for $1. If you hide when someone's paid $1, they're like, what the fuck? I just paid $1 and now you've hid my shit. Like what? Like that's not cool. And the reason why hide quietly was removed is because if you think about channels becoming codified in the protocol, hide quietly is not a thing because the protocol is public, it's on chain. So the action has to be public. So like this notion of hide quietly, that's very much a client concept. So that's why they removed it because they're like, well, you can't really codify this into the protocol. And we're kind of trialing these different features to figure out how to represent channels in the protocol. So let's remove this thing. But I was basically like, look, I did this a few times. I was like, okay, well, I curate this channel a lot. Like there's a lot of garbage that's getting posted to it all the time. And I'm like getting that stuff out of there. And so I was like, all right, I guess I'll just hide. I'll warn and hide. But then I started getting DMs from people like, why did you hide my stuff? Like I just paid $1. Why'd you hide it? And I'm like, oh, like, okay, I don't like this. And then also too, from the blowback from hiding earlier in the week, I was like, okay, this like the whole point of doing a channel and putting the work in is status. You get status. But if hosting is status creating, but then public moderation is status destroying, then the trade stops making sense. You're like, if I'm just getting dunked on for being like a censor and a narc and no fun, then what am I even doing? Like, why would I do this? So I was like, I'm not going to do warn and hide. Like, I'm done doing that. I just didn't moderate anything. And what I noticed is that what would have otherwise like ripped, like what would have gotten 100, 200, 300 likes got like 30. And because there was so much crap, There was just like so much noise in the channel that the good stuff couldn't surface. And I was like, whatever, it is what it is. And then they added hide quietly back. So I was like, okay, I can go back to curating, but it's an interesting problem. So the question is, how do you create a system where the moderator, the host, can moderate, they can curate, and they can do it on chain, or they can do it, say, on hub, like in this public fashion, without getting blowback, without people getting pissed at them. That's very difficult. I know. So I talked to Varun about a couple ideas. They're working on stuff. I'm excited to see, the next iteration, but it's a very, very difficult problem, because what you want, what you really want is where hosts do have status for moderating, that the moderation creates high signal, high quality channel experience, and there's no blowback. They're not getting dunked on from people who are saying, oh, you're censoring me. How you do all of that in a public way is very, very difficult.
Yeah. I have some initial reactions to that. And also, I laughing because I told Varun, I was like, oh, yeah, I'll do it. And I totally did not make the cut for the channel pass experiment. I was like, oh, I didn't hear back. And then I was like, oh, I think that means that I did not get the cut as a moderator for the channel pass. I got an F. But there's a couple things that I want to react to. Is A, on the hide quietly. Of course, the antitrust part of me is like, wait, it actually feels unfair to pay money and then not get what you think you're paying for. So I understand why they would message you. I don't think it's reasonable or fair for you to have to deal with every single DM from somebody who is upset. That to me is a nightmare, and I understand why you don't want to do that. At the end of the day, too, what we've talked about is that you're curating. And I think what is unique about channels is that these aren't discords. This isn't moderation the same way that you are moderating other things. And this isn't true of every channel, but this is true of your channel, of memes, is that you're actually curating. In TED, too, like TED there's stuff that's posted where I'm like, I'm going to hide this just because it doesn't actually meet what the ethos of this channel is. And even though it's not necessarily something that needs to be moderated or removed. I think right now, a lot of farcasters is thinking of them as one and the same, and we need to remove those and set those apart. I just think there's a fundamental difference between curation and moderation, and I don't know if we're thinking about it that way, and I don't know if we have to, but...
No, I think that's really insightful and very clarifying. It's an astute observation. I mean, even for my own thinking, I really like it. I think I've been conflating those two things, and they are very different. I think the way I would think about it is moderation would be wherein you have a set of norms or guidelines, and anything that doesn't meet those gets nixed. And anything that doesn't explicitly violate those is in, because you're just like, whatever, it doesn't violate the norms, it's fine. Curation would be like a level above that. It's like in a more opinionated version, where it's like, not only do must you meet the minimum requirement, I'm actually going to be like cherry picking only the best stuff. That's how I think about it. But I think like the other kind of analogy here would be, let's say that you pay to go to a sporting event, you pay to go to the Lakers game, but then you get drunk and belligerent and then they kick your ass out. It's like, and then you go, well, I paid to be here. It's like, yeah, you paid to be here, but you got to like conform to like the norms of this environment. And if you don't, you're gone. And I feel like this is where there's like this is where I think they do get kind of conflated, because one of the things that I said is like non-dankness it will be hidden. And what I'm trying to communicate is like, this is subjective. It's not an objective list of things that as long as you meet these rules, you're in. It's like, I'm letting you know, hey, I have an opinion, and if I don't like it, it's gone. And I think that's where it does turn into like, well, is this curation or is it moderation? Because what does non-dankness even mean? Well, it's just subjective. It's subjective to the preferences of the host. I don't know. I guess stepping back, I think a lot of it's just like expectation setting on the part of the host, and like how opinionated or non-opinionated do you want to be? But I do feel quite strongly that at the end of the day, all of this stuff is like hot air. Doesn't really matter. What people really want is a great experience. They want to open memes. They want to scroll through. They want to thumb through. They want to laugh, and then they want to move on. So it's like very important that the first 5, 10, 15, or 20 things that they see are funny. They like literally make them laugh. And then they leave and they're like, oh, I like memes. And if you don't pretty aggressively moderate and curate as the thing scales, that is not the outcome that will be produced. What will then happen is they go to the channel, they're like, lame, 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 mildly offensive, lame, eh. That only has to happen a few times before they just don't go back. And so I feel like it's super important in the same way that you would with product, like product design and product development, where you always have to anchor on what is the user, what is the, what is the need, what is the use case, what are they trying to do. You can like nerd snipe yourself into thinking about all this complex technical stuff and interesting things that you can do, but at the end of the day you have to pull yourself back into reality, which is like, wait a minute, what actually matters to the end user here? And I think, to me, my kind of guiding principle is people go to memes to laugh. That's it. And so it's my job to make sure that what they see makes them laugh. And that's the value. I actually don't care if it's benevolent dictator, antitrust, whatever, whatever. I'm just like, as long as people laugh, that's what matters.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a complicated topic. I think you're absolutely right that these are two different things. And I trend more towards curation, you know?
Again, I've been so busy. It's like I've literally been underwater
Yeah.
for so many different reasons. But I look at the TED channel, TED, and was like, oh, this used to be a place where a lot of people were posting controversial opinions. And because I haven't been able to really lean into it because I've been spread so thin, I've noticed people stop posting controversial opinions or like coming here to be like, oh, what's like a new taboo topic that we want to be discussing. And that bums me out. And if I had, could just like clone myself, I would spend more time there. But you're 100% right in that the curation is very important. And at the end of the day, what I think you've built is almost a decentralized meme account where you still get your own personal brand. And instead of having like fuck Jerry or whatever all the meme accounts are, it's just, hey, this is where you go to see the best farcaster relevant or non-farcaster relevant memes that are in this ecosystem. And no one would scream if there was a meme account and you only chose the memes that you like every week to post on that meme account. If you did it from an account and just posted all of these, I think that's like, to your point, every channel, I think you and I are like hyper obsessed with channels, and everybody else is also hyper obsessed with frames. And we can talk about frames next.
Yeah.
But I feel like we've really leaned into this like channel or like channel scale. And this is the same exact reason why is like there can be channels that are just moderated and not curated. And that's okay. But there are going to be channels like yours. And if I have time ever again in the near future, mine and, I think Six does one, July does it well, to like curate these and build a community, because again, most communities are well curated, and if channels are communities, then that's just an inevitable part of it. And if people don't like it, again, like go to a channel or create a channel where there is no moderation, and that is just what it is. But I'm glad that we are having this conversation about it, because people talk a lot about technical elements of it, and I'm like, wait, there's a lot of culture and like soul in what these things are. And I think we dig into it enough.
I think you're right. I mean, I think that channels, I'm so insanely bullish on channels. Like, I think they could be huge. And I'll give you an example. Like, an analogy to the Web 2 world is, look at Wall Street Bets. That whole memetic phenomenon, that was a subreddit. There is an analogy to be made between subreddits and channels. They're internet communities. Now, the difference, and why I'm so bullish on channels, is that channels, number one, are on chain, and they can have their own economic tools. I think DGen is a really good example of this. But you could imagine, and there's a bunch of people that are thinking about channel funding, channel governance. Channels can absolutely be the nucleus of movements, of like mass movements. It's where you can coordinate people, culture, money, governance, like all of these things. And the organizing unit, the canonical unit of that is a channel. So I think it's a huge design space with an enormous amount of potential. And I agree. I think it is important to talk and think about the kind of nitty-gritty details of how you get them to work. And the reason why it matters is because the ones that get it right are going to be really big. Mm-hmm. To go way out there for a minute, if you think about Balaji's whole kind of like network state concept, where you have a small internet community and they crowdfund and they have digital, property, and then they have physical property, like all like channels are petri dishes for this sort of thing. But it's going to matter a lot the strategy of the channel host. Do you have one host? Do you have many hosts? Do you moderate? Do you curate? Like, do you have passes? Do you have to pay to post? Like, there's all these kind of dials, and I think depending on how you turn them, that's going to determine the outcome. And so I think what's exciting to me about this exploration that we're seeing is we're going to figure out what is the winning strategy. What is the right combination of things that gets you what you want, which is a thriving community of values aligned people that want to do fun and interesting things together.
It's interesting. I think there will be multiple right ways to do it as well. And there will be different right ways for what your overall goal is. And I only say that because I love how Balaji thinks about network states. I love being able to find people your values aligned with all over the globe. One thing that was really special to me was actually the LA book club meetup that I hosted with Kimmy Res Ipsa. It was exactly a week ago. And for me, that was, wow, this is what is so fulfilling. It's like we've actually used technology to feel more connected and to meet in person and to gather a community in real life that otherwise we never would have been connected. And of course, this has been happening with meetup.com or Eventbrite or all of these others. But because everything is on chain and online and you're able to connect easily, now we're all connected. I just saw a couple of them in East Denver. And for me, like this crazy idea is like, how do we actually like move this LA channel to be a replacement for, I guess Nextdoor would be like the closest equivalent for these like channels, is like, how do you actually turn a city channel into a Nextdoor equivalent? Because Nextdoor is now a dumpster fire, I'm pretty sure. It's just like people fighting and at X, Y, and Z. But there's a lot of value in knowing who's around you and being able to meet up. Some of my favorite people in LA are farcaster people, because we talk about the same things, we have shared interests, we want to do similar activities, and then it's a lot easier to connect with them through Farcaster and see what's going on in the LA channel than it is. And so what works for memes might not be what works for LA, but they have very different goals in a way.
That's right. I think that's astute. I mean, that's again what makes channels so exciting, is that they can be many different things to many different individuals and groups, and it makes sense too that, like, if you think about how just society is changing, like culture, jobs, family, these things are being disrupted and diffused, and people still want to belong. They still want to be part of something bigger than themselves. But the notion that you had a physical community for which that's true, or a church group or whatever, these are becoming like less and less true, less and less common. And so I think people finding each other on the internet, connecting, and then co-locating is I think a growing and powerful trend. Yeah. Okay, I want to add on to what you just said. It's a crazy analogy to make, and I think it's it is groan worthy. I will admit that up front, but I do think it's still worth sharing, which is, it's a personal story. Okay, so I am an only child who grew up with a single mom. So like big family things, and moved around, so like never really had a strong family or like social kind of group growing up. And when my wife and I got married, she was like, I want to have a big wedding. I want to do a big wedding. And I was like, that makes zero sense to me. I'm not interested in that at all. We should just, go to a courthouse, sign the papers, move on. Like, I don't know why we would spend all this money just to have like, a dinner and a party or whatever. And she was like, just trust me. It's going to be awesome. It's only something that you're going to realize until after the fact. So just trust me. I was like, all right, fine. So we had our wedding, and it was fucking awesome. It was like probably one of the best days of my life. And the reason why is because I had all these people in my life from various stages of my life, like my best friend who I grew up with. And then I had people who I like hung out with in my early 20s, my mid 20s, my early 30s, like from work, from like all like walks, or all moments of time in my life. And it was incredible. I was like, it makes sense to me now. Like the light bulb went off. I was like, oh, this is why people do this, because it's so unique. It's so rare. And so the reason why is because it's so curated. It's like you're getting, like, you really put a lot of thought into like curating this group. And I think, to me, the promise of what we're talking about is that you can, you're not going to get to like wedding level curation, But one of the problems of the internet and social media is that you have this giant haystack and you have all these needles in this giant haystack. And what you want is to create an environment where you have all the needles together. All the needles that want to be together are together. And I think that what we're talking about is kind of an iteration on the means by which to achieve that. I think, like you said, Eventbrite and Meetup and so on. It's like you can kind of get there. But I mean, I remember going to like a lot of meetups in like 2011, 2012, and it's like they're very hit or miss, and a lot of that was because of the people. We talked about this earlier in this conversation around farcaster and I've joked about the Romerga rhythm. In the Romerga rhythm we trust, which is like what we're talking about is
Yeah.
curation. We're talking about finding people who share the same values and who want to be together. They want to do interesting things together. And I think like at the end of the day, that's why all this tech matters. That's what it's all in service of, is creating those kinds of IRL and URL communities that is super dense. It's super high signal. And like we said earlier as well, they may be different. Some may be excited about tech, some may be excited about sports or some other thing or whatever. And I think like that's what makes it exciting. That's what makes that's again why it's worth the effort to invest in these new tools and in this new paradigm. That's like in my mind, the analogy kind of anchors it to like a real world experience where I'm like, oh yeah, that's why we're building this.
Okay, first off, that was not groan worthy at all. I was like, wow. I was like tearing up. I was like, this is so special. So maybe I'm not the right target audience. I feel like I was the perfect target audience. And I was like, wait, it's so true. And something else that is almost better than what you're creating at a wedding is like, even if you think about Meetup, if you think about all these others, once you meet people at meetup.com, you transition off of meetup.com or wherever, Eventbrite. Like you then exchange numbers or you say, what's your Instagram or whatever. And what's unique about Farcaster in a way is that you don't have to transition to a new place. Basically, everyone we're curating for FarCon is coming from Farcaster. That's where we're getting the data. And then you can continue to build those relationships in person, but also at the same place where you initially created them as well. And there's no other social network right now that allows you to do that in a way. I loved that analogy. It made me tear up. I'm so happy for you and your wife and the family and the life that you've built.
Thank
So
you.
anyways, that just was like, oh.
We can move on from channels, but still, I feel like it's endlessly fascinating.
Yeah. And then a good segue
Yeah.
is frame transactions are coming.
Yeah.
And I know we did subscribe with Warps last week. As somebody who's building and would use frame transactions, do you want to share a little bit more about why it might excite you?
Yeah. So this is, I mean, I'll share something that I shared in the first episode, which is it effectively turns Warpcast into the UX friendly way to use crypto, because rather than asking the user to meet crypto where crypto is, it inverts that. Crypto meets the user where the user is. So they're already in the app, they're already in their feed or their channel or whatever, and the transaction is surfaced right there in a cast. The value proposition is there, the action is there, the call to action, and they can just execute it. Now, what happens when they press that button is there's this whole machine that starts to go into motion and things change, but it obfuscates all of that. And so like the thing, in my opinion, is like in-frame transactions is, I think, the most exciting thing to happen in crypto in many years because of the user experience. I mean, I think that everybody feels the pain so acutely, like every developer, every user. It's just like getting a wallet, connecting a wallet, funding a wallet. That like, it's so painful and the drop off is so big. Warpcast really nailed the onboarding. I mean, I have friends who not only they don't know about crypto, but they're like very skeptical about crypto, and they had no issues onboarding into Warpcast. So I think if there's this really easy onboarding flow, and then it's just kind of iceberg where they just see this little tippy top of like, oh, press this button, get this thing, and then all the complexity is obfuscated. I think that's, I mean, it's one of the crown jewels, I think, of crypto getting mass adoption, is that kind of UX, and importantly, it's actually better than what you would see in Web 2, because it's only like one button. It does like one-click check. It does like Amazon one-click checkout for everything. For every developer that wants it can put that in the feed. I'm extremely bullish, super excited. I think that the first pass is like it's a permissioned, it's a privileged feature that, yeah. So I don't think that just anybody can do it. I think that uh, that's how they're gonna roll it out, is by doing it slowly with trusted developers and then figure out how to scale it.
There's a couple of things that I think we should just do rapid fire. Like, hey, we have some random
Mm-hmm.
topics because some of this stuff we can dig in for a long time. We launched many such cases, Hypersub. And I know GM Farcaster, I believe they also have a Hypersub. This is interesting to me because here are two very Farcaster native podcasts. And then look at Pirate Wire's major podcast, has a channel. And then Turpentine, major podcast media empire, also just started a channel in addition to Moment of Zen. I'd love to chat about what are the distinctions between what Mike Solana and Eric Torenberg can do or are doing versus what Hypersub uniquely enables them to do with their community as well. And then how we're thinking about using it, because anyone who's listening, we want your help. Like, we want to know what you want out of a subscription. So I want to think through, there's these like two huge podcasts, and I think Into the Bite Code now is also on it. And so we're seeing more podcasts move over. And so how do you think about this? Obviously, we're just like podcast newbies who are doing this to shoot the shit because we have a great time together. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that every social network has its own culture, its own way that it wants people to interact with it. I think this is why the people who got really big on Instagram weren't big on Snapchat, and the people that were really big on Snapchat weren't really big on TikTok. And same with YouTube. It's like every social network in a way is its own medium, and each medium has its own people who kind of figure it out and are like, this just makes sense to me. Like, one thing a couple of people have said that are like they're really active on Twitter, they come to Farcaster and they're like, I just don't get Warpcast. Like, it just doesn't click for me. And I'm like, yeah, that's because you've been on Twitter for like years and years and years. And like, that's, you're kind of molded to like that network. And it's funny because I have the inverse reaction. I'm like, I've stayed away from everything until I founded Fabric. And then I was like, okay, I need to be on social media. And then I just really committed to Warpcast. So Warpcast to me is like the native medium. It's like how I think. I'm like, oh, I'm going to post this in this channel and I'm going to do this. And like, it just makes sense and it works. But when I go to Twitter, I'm like totally confused. I'm like, I don't know how to do this. And so I think one of the challenges, if you look at, say, Pirate Wires or Turpentine, is that like those are very much Substack, YouTube, Twitter phenomenons. Like, that's the tooling that they use, that's the tooling that they really understand, and I think are probably getting the most out of. I think there's new mediums that are emerging: Warpcast, Hypersub, Unlonely, others. I do, Zora, yeah. I mean, there's a bunch. There's a bunch of stuff. I mean, we're all just kind of building and using each other's things. It's making sense to us because we're very like native to these new mediums that are emerging, and so I guess the thing that the pitch that I would make to them, and like why it's worth putting in the effort to adopt these new tools and think in these new tools. Like, for example, for us, we're like, oh, we're going to put the episodes on Zora. We're going to set up a Hypersub, and then we're going to airdrop the Zora mints to the Hypersub subscribers. Like, that's a very like, and that was like obvious to us from the beginning. But that's like, most people would not have that thought. And so it's work to like start thinking in the paradigms of these new mediums. But the pitch that I would make is that the reason why being on chain matters is because what emerges over time is a social graph, and it's a social graph that's yours. So, for example, every single person that mints an episode of this podcast, right, or that subscribes, or that like subscribes to Club TED, like, we're starting to see like, oh, you have all these nodes, you have these interactions between the nodes, all of that's public. And you get that for free just by being on chain. Whereas good luck getting that data from YouTube. Do you think YouTube's going to say all of the people that listened to you also listened to this other thing? And by the way, here's all their data. You can export it and you can import it into some other tool so that you can create some unique offering over there. Like, you can't do that. Consider the following example where it's like, oh, I'm going to export all of the people who minted this NFT and all of the people who subscribed to the Hypersub NFT. And then I'm going to create an event on event.xyz, and we're going to have some like cool like dinner party or some cool meetup or something like that. You cannot do that. If you said, I want to do the equivalent using Substack, Patreon, and YouTube, you can't. And so I think like
No.
the one sentence elevator pitch would be, you can do more things with your audience by virtue of the fact that this data is public. And so you should start using these tools. That's the pitch that I'd make. I also recognize that that is not an easy transition. It takes real work to learn the new tools and to figure out how to combine them in a compelling way.
I think that's the same exact pitch I would make. And I'm very lucky to have you as a thought partner and as a very fun brainstorm partner for a lot of the Club TED stuff, because again, we're not seeing that many people do it. And it goes back to one of our first conversations, like sometimes you need to connect the dots for other people. And so for Club TED, we just did a collab with Sumit of Outcast, where we put it into the universe and he was excited to do it. And now we have a new collection called Podcasts. It's open to Outcasts. It's open to Club TED. It was open to people who are his hypersub subscribers. And you can think of a world in which, oh, there's also a lot of podcasts on Farcaster. And we know who's active in all those podcast channels. We know what's going on. You have connections. I have connections. You could very much see us using all this on-chain data as a way to reward people and bring them together that have shared values across multiple communities, even people who might not have minted a podcast, and kind of like bring them into the fold. And so for me, that's so exciting. And the fact that we even did this initial collab with Sumit to be like, hey, let's see what this looks like and have like the first on-chain collab that is leveraging two unique data sets. He could have just done that on his own, right? He could have been like, oh, I'm allow listing and opening this to anybody who has Club TED members. And people have done that before. But it becomes 10 times, almost 100 times more powerful if you work together and find shared value. And then we went out with a united announcement saying like, here it is, we're so excited about this for X, Y, and Z reasons. And so I think what Mike Solana is doing, I think what Eric Torenberg is doing is so incredible, because they also have two very tech forward audiences. Like you couldn't find two people with more tech forward audiences than them. Yeah, so I guess basically you guys, happy to consult for you if you need a free consultant. Not free. I will charge, actually.
I'm the biggest Mike Solana fanboy, so that would be amazing if you started doing that. But you got it. You nailed it. I mean, I'm equally as grateful. I mean, you were connecting the dots in ways that even we weren't, and moving the needle. You know, like I think for us, we were like, oh, in theory, this is really cool and you could do this. And you're like, let's fucking do it right now. And so it's like, oh, okay, great. And we made it happen. So, I mean, another example would be, say, Farcon 3. You get a 20% discount if you have had a 1-year subscription to any of the Farcaster native podcasts. Like, okay, sounds cool, good idea. Why is it valuable? It's valuable for two reasons. Number one, it's valuable to whoever may be doing Farcon 3 because it gives them essentially immediate ticket sales, ingress. They're like, oh, I have this audience of people that I can tap basically from day one. So there's like the beginnings of distribution, because you can go to these small communities. You say, okay, well, there's these thematically, there's like these 4 or 5 podcasts that are kind of oriented around Farcaster. We're doing Farcon, which is obviously relevant. And so we'll do a targeted offer to them to bootstrap ticket sales. So that's good for the event. But then it's also really good for those subscribers or those NFT holders, because they're getting more for less. So it imbues their subscription with even more value. Or, a particular NFT mint. It doesn't have to necessarily be a subscription, but like, I do think that subscriptions are a very high signal. So you can imagine the same sort of thing where it's like, oh, we're gonna create a new podcast. Like Turpentine is a network of podcasts. You could say we're gonna kick off a new podcast, and by the way, anyone who's subscribed to these things is going to get something special for subscribing to that thing. It's mutually beneficial. So I think, again, these are the kind of things you can do by virtue of the fact that this data is public and composable.
I want to talk about, and I can pull this up in the podcast, is the growth contraction that we are seeing if we look at the data. Shout out to Pixel, who has created, I think, one of the most prolific Dune dashboards with the Farcaster Dune dashboard. I will explain it quickly, and then we can take like 5 minutes to talk about it, because I do think it's important, is that Frames launched beginning of February. You saw a huge spike. We saw daily active users reach like 20,000, etc. I think It was 40,000. It was up there. There was a while where it was really up there. And then since that, we've seen a slow decline. However, we are still very much above what we were seeing in January. So I would say we're still like 4x above what the last day of January showed, but we have seen a slow and steady decline from peak daily active users from Frame's launch. So, how are you thinking about that? What do you think that means to you? FID registered has also started to taper off. I think new account signups are actually closer to what they were in January as well. So,
We're seeing the same thing, and I think it's to be expected. I think that there was a
at
lot of
Hypersub?
yep.
Okay.
And what to me the thing that matters is the establishment of a new baseline. So we were chugging along at one baseline, we had this massive spike in growth, and then a new baseline is establishing, which is obviously not, it's not this continued growth, which is what you want, but the new baseline is still 10x what the first baseline was. And I think as long as you repeat that process, you're trending, well, you're trending in the right direction. So I think like if I were to, guess, like, I think that there was a lot of excitement around Frames and DGen. I think DGen was kind of ripping at the same time that Frames was announced, and then everybody was like, "Oh my God, this is a really big deal." And so there was a bunch of new ingress and excitement. And then I think at the end of the day, like, we're still delivering on the promise of Frames. I think frame transactions are a good example of that. So I think there's this whole big rush. Oh my God, this is amazing. I think, and then a lot of people churned, but a lot of people stayed. A lot of people stayed. And so I think that's the really important piece. There will be some new innovation. There'll be in-frame transactions. People will do more interesting things. The interface will get better. There'll be, channels will go permissionless. There'll be the next wave of releases that cause that next big bump. That bump will then result in another similar crash. But again, the baseline, the new baseline will be higher. So that's like, that's what I would expect to happen. I don't think it's a bad thing. Obviously, what everybody wants is for the line to just go straight up and then continue going straight up forever. But that's not reality. The bullish case to make is that, oh, it's okay and we'll just keep growing. The bearish case to make would be, say, looking at something like Clubhouse, where Clubhouse had its moment, at the kind of the start of COVID, and then I don't think it ever really came back. Just they're still around, they're still building stuff. It's an amazing team, but there were no successive spikes, that it never did continue to trend up. That's the bear case, for the spike of growth that we just saw, like, not coming back. I think given, the quality and the velocity of the development community that's oriented around farcaster, like that's why I would lean more bullish, because you have all of these creative, hardworking nerds that are innovating. And I think that I'll never bet against that. Wherever that's happening, I will never bet against that.
Same. Well, of course, I don't even want to think about the bear case in general because I'm such a, forecaster maxi. But I do think, like, I don't think the bear case is the bear case, only because, again, what everyone's built so far is very values driven. It comes from a place of thinking long term. It comes from a place of knowing that there's going to be bumps in the road. And it comes from a place of, like, knowing, Johnny, you actually said something last week where you were like, this moment of Frames, we just have to repeat that again and again and again. And it's a momentum thing. And so it comes back as, like, everybody knew that Frames was going to be a spike. And now the next thing is, okay, in-frame transactions and kind of all of the other milestones that you mentioned that we're hoping to replicate as a moment of virality in a way. And I have this whole viewpoint on intentional virality is a great thing when it's aligned with long-term values-driven vision. And I fundamentally believe that the ecosystem that we've created, the only reason that Frames took off, and we've talked about this a lot, there's a variety of reasons, but the major one is that there was 2.5 years of building a dev community who was literally frothing at the mouth to build something. And they're not going anywhere now that they just got rewarded with Frames and this new distribution. I've actually met more random people in the community who want to be building on Farcaster now and are convinced, whereas that wasn't their pre-Frames. And so I'm very bullish on it. I look at this, and to your point, yes, we did set a new baseline. Everyone's prepared now, and it's kind of like, okay, what happens after you win a championship game, right? Like you get to celebrate a little bit, but then you go back and you grind in the off season because you're like, hey, like we have a target on our back, and it's really important to me to perform and to win again next time we have the opportunity to be in the championship game. And so that's how I feel what's going on right now. And it'll be funny. You know what I'm actually excited to see?
What's that?
Who's a Fairweather fan? Like, I think there are a lot of people who now claim to be Farcaster OGs who were nowhere to be found when it was like the true grind. And then all of a sudden frames happened and you see them touting that they're an OG. And so it'll be funny to see like who sticks around during this next wave where it might not be as exciting and who all of a sudden turns back up when the next viral moment is happening.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I will say, like, I don't know, it's like, who cares? You know what I mean? Like, I'm with you. Like, I feel the like, I kind of smirk when I see people who like try to flex, and I'm like, no, you know. But at the same time, I'm like, whatever. Like, if you're helping the network grow, then I don't care.
Yeah, I agree. But I do think it's a good signal for everybody
It
else.
is.
It's important to know who's walking the
That's
walk.
right.
It's important as it relates to venture, especially as it relates to venture, as it relates to builders.
Yes.
Like you want to know people who, at least I personally want to associate myself with people and want to connect with people who see larger picture,
Yes.
can look down the road and know what is valuable, especially if you're a VC. I just got to say that. Your whole job is to forecast the future. So that can dive us into another thing, but I do think I'm really excited to see a lot of venture partners basically roll up their sleeves and start digging on Farcaster. And I think those that stick around are going to be seeing a lot of early stage deal flow because of that.
I agree.
So that's the last thing I'll say.
I agree with that. I think that there's a lot of, you know, one of the funniest things to me about investing is that it's like you have to zig when others zag. Like you have to be a contrarian. And that was what I thought was so funny about this bear market is that nobody was deploying. And so you're like, wait a minute, you're supposed to be these contrarians who are zigging while everyone's zagging, but then none of you are deploying. Like who are the real contrarians? And so the people that I was most interested in is like, who's aggressively deploying? You know, like those are the real gangsters. You know, those are the people who are real contrarians because they're putting their money where their mouth is. They're saying they're contrarian and then they're behaving as contrarians. And I think this is what is so revealing and powerful about data being on chain or on hub. And one of my favorite things I like to say is off-chain talk, on-chain walk. You know, like you know, like Nick, he's like, degen is awesome. It's a big deal. And then he went in hard on you know, he bought a lot of degen. And so you're like, okay, like I can see that he walked the walk. It's revealed. It's observable on chain. I don't know his handle, but he created Farcaster user stat, and you can see like a GitHub style graph.
Yes, I don't know what that
of someone's activity, and it's like I made memes about this. I was like, your FID might be earlier, but your cast history tells the real story. You know, like that's where you really know, you know, who the OGs are. So I'm with you. You know, conviction is rewarded. You know, often it's rewarded. Often it's not. Being early, being active, believing. I mean, you know, that's how people make outsized returns, and I think we're seeing it happen before our eyes right now on Farcaster. It's just a matter of time.
Same.
All right, we got to wrap this up.
Same. Yeah, we got to wrap. Okay.